Hello, I'm Pinky Whalen. Welcome to Los Altos History. Today's guest is Raphael Myers, a lively and articulate gentleman whose family lived here in the early days of Los Altos history. He has some wonderful stories to share. Welcome to Los Altos History, Raphael.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to being here. And going back in time about 75 years, certainly Los Altos has changed. It is impossible for me to recognize. I can almost get lost when I drive around here now.
Why don't you tell us about your first coming to Los Altos?
Well, we first came here in 1912, and our home was located on San Antonio Road, which at that time was a two-lane dirt road, and there was very little traffic, of course, and your nearest neighbor was probably 300 or 400 feet away, because everyone bought acreage in order to raise fruit, and the valley was noted for prunes and apricots at that time.
Now, your father came to Los Altos and built a house.
That's correct. He was a practicing doctor in San Francisco. He practiced out of the Mount Zion Hospital, and he felt that after he had established a family that San Francisco was a poor place to bring up children, and so he looked for a place in the country, and Los Altos appealed to him, and so he moved to Los Altos with my mother and the two children.
The children.
Right.
Maybe first I'll ask you about some of the people you might have met when you came here.
Well,
Did you know the Schaub family?
Yes, and the people, of course, that we knew mostly were the neighbors. The Scotts that lived next door. He had about 5 acres of ground, and next to him were the Wiedemann family, who had a clothing store in Palo Alto, and it's still named after the family, although nobody's living. And down the street a little further was the Dixon family and the Lennox family. So these were all people that were neighbors, farmers.
I have a picture here of the Wiedemann, one of the Wiedemanns. It's a picture that was taken around 1917. It's the baseball team at the grammar school. Do you recognize anyone in the photograph?
Well, John Wiedemann, and the one that I think of mostly is a fellow named Jack Schutte, who I don't recognize, but of course when you look back 70 years, some of these people change a great deal. There's a Buswell boy that I recognize, but there's not too many of them in there that I do recognize.
I think there's a, Clifford Clute or K-L-C-L-U-T-E, does that?
I remember the name, but looking at the picture, I don't recognize him.
Let's see here. Now that was at the grammar school. Did you go to the grammar school at that point?
I started at the Los Altos Grammar School, and there was a lot of difficulty in getting to school because during the winter there was no way of going. Everybody walked, and with the muddy roads and all, you just didn't go to school if it rained too hard. And from there, I left that grammar school and went to William Warren School, which was in Menlo Park, which was a military academy, and then later transferred to the Palo Alto Military Academy because it was more convenient to go there. And then later I came back and went to the grammar school and graduated from the Los Altos Grammar School.
Now when would that have been?
Oh, I'd guess it would probably be around 1922. Okay,
because I have a picture here. This is dated June 1919 of Wiedemann and Buswell, and there are a few
Right.
others are in that
Right,
class. Do you
right.
recognize any of the
Yes,
people in there?
yes, I do. I haven't seen these pictures before, but I do recognize, especially John, because we were quite friendly, being a neighbor.
Mm-hmm. What was your life as a young boy like in Los Altos?
Well, it depends on how far back you want to go.
Well, what did you do to keep busy?
Well, there was basic entertainment was just playing with other kids that were close by, and then of course there were a lot of open fields, and we used to go hunting, and we went fishing, and there was a creek back in Los Altos, I guess it's the Adobe Creek, and there were trout in there, and we didn't bother about licenses or anything like that. You just went fishing, same way with birds that you shot.
Did you find any Indian artifacts at Adobe?
There were artifacts in Adobe, not Adobe, but Indian mounds that were further down San Antonio Road where the Sears is now located. And people used to dig in there and look for things. We found arrowheads, but everybody was looking for a skull. You know, that would be a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a bicycle?
Yes, everybody had a bicycle that could ride, that's for sure. That was the only way you could get around. But later on, we did have horses, and I used to ride a horse and enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. And it was kept on your property.
That's right, yeah.
Uh-huh. And how'd your mother get around? Did she ride her bike, or did she walk? Or?
No, she felt trapped, and so she knew a neighbor, the Peltier family that just lived a matter of a couple blocks away, and Mrs. Peltier drove an electric car, and that appealed to my mother. And so she purchased an electric car, which was available up in Berkeley, and it was a Roush and Lang electric, and at that time was about $5,000, which was a lot of money in those days. This car was capable of going about 50 miles, and the top speed was 35 when it was fully charged, but the last 10 miles were pretty slow.
I understand you kind of got into racing cars with your friend, Mr. Wiedemann.
Well, yes, I bought a car that he had cut down. In those days, you called them cut-down cars. They took the bodies off so that they'd be extremely light. It was a Model T Ford, and later on, this thing developed into a racing car. Put Frontenac head on it and other good equipment that went to make up a racing car, and this got to be a source of worry for my mother.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Did you ever get hurt?
No, tipped over once, but just threw me out of it, but didn't get injured.
Where did you do your racing?
There was a track in San Jose out on Alamac Road, and there was a track that was pretty dangerous, 5/8 of a mile track, and I just went out there once, and that was enough.
How old were you at this point?
I guess I must have been maybe 15, something like that.
A real daredevil.
Well, I don't know what you'd call that, or foolish.
So your father was a doctor and ready to retire, so they decided to move.
Well, they moved to Los
To Los
Altos, but
Altos.
he only lived for a year. He died at age 59, and this left my mother there with 2 small children. Because we moved there, I was only 4, and my sister was 6. So this moved me up to 5, and that was pretty young.
We have an envelope here dated 1913. Can you tell us anything about?
Well, my father was in the hospital at the time, and this envelope enclosed a letter to her,
Oh,
and I thought it might be of interest because of the age of it. In those days, you could mail something for 2 cents. That enclosed letter was postcards were 1 penny.
well, that's a nice memory to have. And the stamps and tag, what was it cost? 2 cents to mail that?
2 cents, right?
2 cents.
Right.
Now, after you went to the grammar school and then you went to the military academy, and we have a great shot of you in your uniform.
Yes, this was a new car that was purchased, and I was attending the Paladin Military Academy at the time, and I guess that the people that sold these cars thought it would be a good sales point, so this picture was taken for the purpose of putting it in the San Jose paper, and they published this, and it was a Chevrolet, it was a coupe, and it was a 190. It was a small car. and it shook so badly after you got up to about 35 miles an hour to look in the rear view mirror you couldn't see anything.
What year about was that?
Oh, that must have been, let's see, probably about 1920.
Did you have your license then?
Yes, I got a license when I was 12 years old, and as a matter of fact, I can show you the license. It's kind of a keepsake because it's such a different license. It was good until revoked, and this license was issued in 1920, and I told them I was 14, and my mother confirmed this fact, but in actuality I was 12. So
Where did you go to get a license at that point?
went to the Department of Motor Vehicles in San Jose,
Uh-huh.
and they didn't give you any test or anything. You just applied for a license, and
And they didn't ask any questions?
no, I think it was $2.
Oh, that's great. Box 5, Los Altos.
That's right.
That's great. I think we have another photograph here of a group, let's see, back at the grammar school, or, wait, what's this? Front of your,
This is a picture of the old house towards the one end of the porch, and these were people that were visiting that had come down from San Francisco. It was a big day to come down from San Francisco. You could drive 35 miles an hour on a 2-lane road, which was El Camino, and so we always saw them when fruit was available. That was at least once a year, because everybody liked apricots, and they'd come down and just drop in unannounced. But that was fine.
so your house must have been used even after your father died. Your mother had friends visiting all the time, so all your friends from the city came down?
Right. It was a big home, so in order to have company, because the neighbors were so far apart, there were no radios. If you wanted entertainment, you just had people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really nice. It was enjoyable.
Well, I remember standing on the front porch and overlooking the lawn, and you could see how many people and how you could accommodate and how pretty it was. You could see why she would want to have all those people around.
Right.
Did your mother work after your father died in Myrtle
No,
Ridge?
no. She was left with adequate means. So she had help in the house, as well as a gardener that was in a gardener's cottage outside.
Mm-hmm.
So the place was kept up with no problem. It was nice.
Did she have lots of hobbies?
No, not a great deal. I think her hobbies were primarily her friends and her kids, you know.
Did she get involved in any clubs in Los Altos? The garden club or?
No, there were no such things.
Oh.
No, not that time. The main thing was just managing the orchard, see that the fruit was sold and that the orchard was cared for. And that kept her busy.
Now, how much land did you have?
13 acres.
13 acres.
That's the part that the old residence was on. In addition to that, my father had purchased 5 acres further down on San Antonio, and then over on Los Altos Avenue, he had 4 acres over there. That was sold later on, and we just kept the 13 acres. Originally, we only had 5, and then next to us was an additional 8 acres that my mother purchased because somebody bought an acre in that area. There were 9 acres, and this left the remaining 8. And this was an old corrugated iron building, and she was afraid that this would be a shanty town, so she bought up the remaining 8 acres and developed that into an orchard because it was a field at that time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, what happened to the corrugated?
It was purchased by a Dr. Black in Palo Alto, and he used it as a weekend place, and ultimately there was a Ford White school that was interested in the land primarily, and they tore down the old shanty and they put up a rather nice place there.
Was it a school or was it a
I think it was a
house?
dance studio.
Oh, a dance studio.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, they taught dancing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh. Now, where did your sister go to school?
She went to school in Castellea,
Oh, she
which
went-
is still operating,
Right.
and she attended that and graduated from there.
And after you got through the grammar school, then where did you go to school?
Went one year, the first year, to Mountain View High School, but things looked kind of wild down there, and so Palo Alto High School looked more inviting, and so I graduated from Palo Alto High School.
Did you drive yourself to school, or did you take the train, or?
No, I drove.
You drove.
Right, yeah. one of the few privileged.
Well, that's great. And then you graduated when, what year from?
That was in 27, I guess.
1927.
Yeah.
And after that, I understand you became interested in aviation.
Yes, Palo School of Aviation started up just north of, or south, I should say, of the Stanford Stadium. And they had a couple of airplanes in there, and of course an airplane at that time, 1927, was a rare thing, and so I had to go look, and that exposure resulted in a compromise with my mother, because she said, well, I'll go for schooling in aviation if you get rid of that racing car. So that's how I got involved with aviation, and graduated from that school and became a licensed pilot in 1928 with license 5012, which is a license for
and that was in the country, in the United States?
That's correct, yeah.
That's amazing. And what did you tell me? How many hours did you have to get?
10 hours of solo was all you needed. And the inspector didn't go up with you. He just watched you, and if you got down safely, why, he figured you were got a license.
Your license.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, after that, did you pursue the aviation, or did you go into another field?
I left the aviation behind because things got really tough at that time. That was the Great Depression, and I was fortunate in getting a job in San Francisco with the Anglo and London Paris National Bank, and I worked for them for 14 years as a trust administrator, eventually at that level. And then the war came along, and so then I went to work for the NACA, which later became the NASA, which we all know today, of course. And I was a research aircraft inspector for them at that time, and I was with them for 25 years. So it was really an interesting job.
And retired when?
In 1968.
68. And left Los Altos in 1946.
46. Right.
Now maybe you could tell us about some of the people who were your neighbors. I think the DeMartinis were there, and
right. The DeMartinis were up on the corner of Hamilton Avenue and San Antonio Road, and the old fruit stand is still in operation up there. I guess they call it the DeMartini fruit stand.
Right.
But Mr. DeMartini was a carpenter in San Francisco, and being a good Italian, he liked the ground, and he used to work out in the orchard there. He had about an acre, I guess, of ground, and he sold the fruit off of there and did raise some vegetables and things that sold.
It's still there, and so is the house.
Yes. He built the house.
Uh-huh.
I remember that.
And the Lauk family, did you
Ray
know?
Laux, yes. He owned a big piece of land down at the corner of El Camino and San Antonio Road, which is now a shopping center. And there was, he leased that for years to the Standard Oil Company, and they had a station there at that corner. And then I saw him again later on. He was in charge of transportation for NACA, and finally he retired from NASA.
I think one of his sons is still around town.
The Laux?
I think, yeah. And there's a Lauk Street off of Los Altos Avenue.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And that was named after him because he owned all that property in there.
Now there were a family named Deckard were down in that same area, weren't they? That raised chickens?
Becker.
Becker,
yes, right. I think that was up on Pine Lane and Los Altos Avenue, near that area, someplace in there.
Now, wasn't the gal that took care of you as a child, didn't she live on Pine Lane?
You're talking about Liza Scott?
Right.
Well, actually, she didn't take care of me, but she did keep the house for us, and whenever we had parties, why, she was a great, she was a colored lady, incidentally, a very dear person, and she used to do all the cooking and service, and it was done real nicely, and everybody loved her. She was really a nice person.
How did she get back and forth?
She walked.
She walked.
Right, and she had about an acre of ground on Pine Lane, and she had chickens there, I remember, and an old windmill. I can still hear it creaking as the wind blew the blades around.
There is a water tower on that, in that area. Was that on her property? Or?
I don't believe so, no. I know the one you're referring to, Now,
Annie Fitz lived up in that neighborhood. Did you know Annie?
I know her from having met her recently, but prior to the recent meeting, I don't recall her, no.
How about this, is it Marvin Adams? Did you know Marvin?
Yes, I went to school with Marvin. I believe he still lives in Los Altos.
Marvin Adams is an amazing man in that he still is playing tennis.
Well, he must be about my age.
Now, how old are you?
I'm 79, 80 next February.
Oh, you're 80 in February.
Right.
Well, happy birthday. You look great.
Thank you. I hope I'm here to enjoy it.
Well, so Marvin's that age too. Well, that's interesting.
I think his original home, when I knew more of it, was on Pepper Lane, and then he moved.
He lives on University Avenue.
Yeah, that's
at
right.
this point.
Yeah.
Then there was a Dixon family. Did you know? Does that mean anything?
Hector Dixon. Yes, I remember. He was a chubby little soul, and we always used to get together as a group of us, and we'd play together.
Now, who built the house that you lived in Los Altos?
Well, there was an architect in San Francisco that my family knew, and his name was Kahn, and he built this home and later moved to Los Altos because he liked it so well, and he bought a place over on Hamilton Avenue next to the Bushes and the Haber family that lived over there. There were a couple of houses there, and he built in there.
Yeah, we have some photographs that I'd like to share with you, and it's pictures of your house. And incidentally, for those who are viewing, the house is located at 206 North San Antonio Road, which was the Happy Hours Nursery School up until I think a few years ago. And that nursery school was in operation for about 30 years. There's a picture here of the dining room. Or
this is the living room.
That's the living room.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
How many rooms were in the house?
About 16, if you counted them all. It was quite a large home with a very extensive basement that ran under the entire house. It was used for skating and stuff like that during the winter months, so that we were down there with the furnace, which was a wood and coal furnace to keep the house warm. I remember that distinctly because I used to have to get up and get the furnace started.
Now here's a picture of the billiard room.
That's correct.
When was that added on?
That was added on later, and I'd say this was probably about 1922, and I think it was my mother's hope that it would keep me away from the billiard parlors. So it was used extensively by a lot of people, including myself, because it was a lot of fun.
So you didn't go to other billiard parlors, you stayed right there.
Right.
Or you wouldn't tell.
Right, it was far nicer.
And then there is a picture here of a nice-looking woman.
Oh, that's my mother.
And did you take that picture of her?
Yes, I did. This was in the conservatory, which was a place where we had a lot of plants and things growing, and it was adjacent to the dining room. And it made a very nice outlook. Yeah, I can recall that very vividly. And the flooring was concrete, and it was broken up into squares, as you can see. It was marked off like most concrete floorings are. And I can still recall my sister and myself sitting down and putting our feet in this wet concrete for the purpose of establishing our ages at the time, and then under that was when the house was built and finished.
Now here's a wonderful shot.
Oh, this is a picture of yours truly looking at a Look magazine.
Look at who's on the cover.
It's a Look magazine.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Wallace Simpson.
Yeah, this is, I was in the living room, and it's facing, as I look at the picture, the front door, and then through some real large paneled glass doors that entered into the dining room. It was really a lovely old home.
And I think there's a shot here of your Christmas tree, if I can find it among this. You must have had some wonderful Christmases at your house.
Oh yes, Christmas was a big deal. And in those days, Santa Claus came and decorated the tree. And when you went to bed, the next day when you came down, why, the Christmas tree was up and Santa Claus had done it. You know, that brings back a lot of memories.
A lot of memories.
Right.
Now, there was a house across the street that the man who built the billiard room on your house had
belonged to Andrew H. Knoll, and he built that house a little at a time. He took years to do it, and I think it must have been the things that were left over from jobs that he had. It was a very different looking house, but a lovely, lovely home. And his wife's name was Elsie, but they were very quiet people. And
You know, we're really happy to have that picture because the people who own the house now are really curious to know, have some of the background. And this is the first time we've really been able to
well, you can see the house here because this picture was taken shortly after it was completed, and the plants are so small that you have a chance to take a picture of the house. As I've driven by it recently, it's almost impossible to see the house because all these trees are growing up in front.
Let's see, what kind of a car did your mother have?
She drove that Rauschenlang electric car.
And run by?
It was battery powered. There were 42 batteries in there, cells I should say, and that powered the electric motor, and it was very simple. It was operated, when you went to steer it, it didn't have a wheel, it was a tiller, and that was something that was carried over from the first automobiles. They were all tiller cars. Was
she one of the first ladies in town to have her license and have a car?
I wouldn't say the first lady that would be driving a car, but certainly the second one that had an electric car, that's for sure.
Everyone was probably jealous of her, I would think.
Well, there weren't too many cars, actually. People did drive mostly horse and wagons. And here, of course, when you finished your journey with the horse, it became necessary to unhitch it and put it in the stable and all, and unless you had some way to take care of this part, it wasn't worthwhile.
Now, tell us about some of the other buildings in Los Altos at that point.
Well, originally, as I recall it, there was the post office building, and this later turned into be a drugstore, and that building is still there. And then there was a bank building, which was across the street, and I think the banker who had charge of that was Mr. Clements. And then the Etchenberger family, they had a hardware store, and then down the street a little from that was a grocery store. And
now, driving through town today, or since you've come back, how does it look? Does it look any different?
It looks like a city, which it is, but it built up so fast, it's really amazing. I just can't visualize it having gone ahead like this. If had I known, I would have never sold when we did sell.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'd have been a millionaire 15 times over.
What are you doing now that you've left the area?
At this point, I live in Palo Alto with my good wife, Alice, and we have a home there. And I like gardening. We have a lot of orchid plants and things like that that require care. And then we've got automobiles that I enjoy working on and maintaining, and then I can do almost anything around the house, so I'm kept busy that way. And then having a little financial background, there are a few widows that I help with their financial problems just for the sake of helping them out.
Well, it sounds like you've had a wonderful, productive life.
Thank you. I think I have. It's been a real pleasure being here as your guest.
Thank you, Raphael, for being our guest today. And thank you for being with us on in Los Altos History.